you live from the ancient metropolis of ancient America, one of the largest cities in ancient America, one of the largest cities in the United States before the United States. Back when the Europeans were still struggling with famine, strife, war, depression, poverty, and still struggling to get enlightenment. Back in Europe during the Dark Ages, right here in ancient America, we had an advanced civilization, an illumination that took place right here on this very mound. I'm now standing on top of the main feature here at Cahokia, which is known as Monk's Mound, which rises 4 terraces from the ground, about 100 feet in height. Acres and acres. Just look around behind me. Across the street here is the part of the expanse of the Cahokia complex. All of this would have been part of Cahokia. You can see there's several mounds. We have the twin mounds in the back. Way in the distance back here, a little difficult to make out, you have the wood henge, another example of a wood henge. We've seen examples of these, or evidence for these, at Poverty Point, as well as some of the other sites that we've been visiting and exploring and investigating as part of this Ancient America road trip. Astronomical alignments, particularly the solstice, which is coming up in just a few days. We'll go get a closer look at that a little later. Absolutely amazing. So I'm standing on the top terrace right now. You wouldn't even know it. Well, let's turn the camera around so you guys can see what I'm seeing, and I can take you along here for the journey. So here's the stairs. May not look like much from the camera, but it's actually quite challenging coming up here. And you can see, you come up here, and it's really, you know, I like coming up here before going to Egypt or Mexico or, you know, sites like this, because it prepares you to start climbing when you have to do some of those climbs into the Bent Pyramid or the Red Pyramid. Very similar, but the first time I came here, the impression I got right away, it felt like a Mesoamerican pyramid. What's up, bud? What's up, Lala? I can barely see because the sun is gleaming off my screen, so it's very difficult to read the comments. I will come back and try to address them later. If you like the video, please remember to give it a like. And aside from the super comments, leave a comment in the regular comment section. And if you're not already subscribed, please subscribe. So this is the top terrace. This is terrace 4. Let me come over here and give you, this over here is what's called the southern ramp. You make your way up the southern ramp, and then you have the first terrace, which there was a mound and some structures built there. Then we have the second and third terrace, and actually that's here a little bit. And then this is the fourth and final terrace back here. Actually, if you look at these signs, you can get an idea for some of here. So this is looking at from the first terrace below, which I pointed out to you, you would have the view of the Grand Plaza and the twin mounds. In the distance there is the interpretive center. So there is the interpretive center, which is one of the best interpretive centers. I don't want to say museum, but it's like a museum. There's artifacts and a lot of information there. One of the best interpretive centers I've ever been to. And so you can see the mounds here. We have the Grand Plaza and the twin mounds. Mound 49, 57, 48, Stonehenge. Over here, from this vantage point, in this direction, and this is St. Louis in the distance. You can make out the iconic features there from modern day, but we're standing on this monumental structure from our past, going back at least 1,000 years. That's what the wood henge would have looked like. Again, it was used for observing astronomical alignments, as well as probably ritual and ceremony. There were actually, and you can see there's some other, you have some more mounds here, which is a little difficult to make out with the trees. There's one right over here. Wood henge was expanded over time. I believe it was either 5 or 6. It was several phases. The excavations reveal that each phase the circle would increase. It would get wider and wider, and they don't know why that is. From an esoteric point of view, I would say it probably has to do with the cosmology, or, you know, if you think in terms of the breath, the eternal breath, breathing in and breathing out. It's like a seed that expands. It's really no different than the way the temples of ancient Egypt were constructed. So, for example, in ancient Egypt, you would have the Holy of Holies, the Naus. This was the seed. This is where the elite shaman of Egypt, the high priest, the initiated, were able to access. And it was from that seed that the temple grew out, and everything would grow around that structure. You would have the, you know, it would go out into all the other phases of construction. So it's the same recurring theme that we find, this idea of life and death, renewal and regeneration, a seed, birth and rebirth, you know, or basically life, death, and rebirth. Death not being a final ending, but really the beginning of a cycle. It's a transition period, what we in the esoteric tradition refer to as the Great Initiation. So it's a continuation, and I think we probably have a similar ontology with Stonehenge growing out, expanding for some reason. It's just inherent in a lot of the universal principles. Here in the back is where Path of Souls. Yes, David. So if you guys remember when we were at Moundville in Alabama, I was excited to go there. They have the artifact with the hand and the eye, which is a representation or relates to the Path of the Souls, which corresponds to the ancient Egyptian point of view or ontology with respect to the afterlife. Here on the top mound in the back, there would have been a structure. This is supposed to have been where the elite dwelling place for the elite, essentially. So you would have your shamanic ruler, you know, it's just like the pyramids or mounds or any primordial mound or mountain. It's usually the high initiates, the elite, the king. I don't want to say king because they really didn't have kings, but the shamanic ruler. These rulers were likely medicine men who knew how to work with plants and herbs, as well as astronomers. They would observe the sky. What an excellent vantage point for observing the sky, and you really get a sense of what that was like. Before I take you out back, just one more time, you know, looking through the eyes of a shamanic ruler, one can imagine what it was like standing here on top of the mound, overlooking the community. And by doing this, it's essentially becomes a symbol of order, a symbol of structure in society. These mounds, symbols themselves, different shapes. We have the conical mounds, the aerial mounds, the elliptical mounds. Here, these long mounds are referred to as ridge mounds. Sometimes ridge mounds would encase mounds within. The circular mounds, you know, there's so much symbolism that goes into the circle. Especially a circle is going to either contain an energy or exert an energy, right? So if you have, it's either convex or concave. If it's closed in, they're likely containing an energy. So in the case of burial mounds, it was for a rebirth. It was a way of bringing life back into the womb, into the underworld, into the underground underworld, to be reborn anew and to rise that land back up to the sky, most likely energetically charged. Not in terms of, let's say, electricity or modern science, but we're really talking about a vibrational science. Essentially, this is difficult for a lot of Western-minded society to grasp, because if we can't see it through science, we can't believe it. But best believe the indigenous people had an ontology and understanding for imbuing the vital life forces and energies and vibrations. This is why, you know, different feathers were used from different animals, or things that would have characteristics and qualities of that animal, traits of that animal. It could be a mineral or a vegetable, infusing different energy. And so it was a matter of containing that energy within the ground and using the earth energy. You know, the archaeologists have found varying degrees of soil in the mounds. They believe that was for structural stability and to, you know, prevent or to work as a drainage system, essentially. But there may be something more to using different soils. There may be different characteristics to those soils. especially when we think from an alchemical perspective or a hermetic perspective, with the essences or life forces, the nymphs that would go into that sort of process. So look, you're up here on top of the mound. You can just imagine yourself as the ruler of Cahokia, overlooking the masses. And what this does, essentially, this gives us sort of a objective perspective, if you will. You're at the top of the pyramid, so you're not engaged in the conversation. You're not on the ground. You're up above it all, looking at it from an adequate distance, from a bird's eye view. You gain a more masterful sense. You get really more mastery over yourself. Obviously, to be up here on the mountain, you would have to be someone who would know how to manage or conquer your lower self, and come from a balanced position, someone who knows how to harmonize and basically collect themselves in a way to gain this sort of mastery. But you'd be able to look over the entire landscape and see things from a unique point of view that the commoners wouldn't have. So we're very fortunate today that we're able to come here as tourists and climb up this sacred landscape, because the average person in ancient times would not have this luxury. Pedro says, one of my favorite places, stay hydrated. It's a hot one. It is, and I'm dying, and I'm about to go down and get some water because I didn't bring any up here with me. But yes, it's very hot up here, but I just want to show you guys what it looks like. I want to give you that view from the top of the mountain, from the top of the mound, from the top of the pyramid, what it would be like observing everything from up here. So you can also imagine that in the distance we would have a stockade, essentially a palisades, or a wall which would be fenced in, and I'll show you an example of that over here. The archaeologists were able to determine different where the poles would go. Wooden beams would go into trenches in the ground, somewhere into like 5 feet into the ground, and these wooden beams would rise up 15 to 20 feet in height and serve as a defensive wall. But I question if these walls were used purely for this functional purpose of defense. I do think that there may be something more to these walls, something symbolic. Typically, when we have a wall like this, what we have, and you can see here in the distance, they have, here it looks like someone's left some offerings. Always a good idea when you come to a sacred space to give something, to leave something. And so a lot of times you'll find examples of stuff like this. Clearly, this isn't somebody's spilled lunch. There's a whole banana, there's some berries, green beans, sliced cantaloupe, and orange, strawberries, everything left intact. This is clearly a modern offering here. And so that's very cool. And so you have two different phases. There were multiple phases of how they would construct these walls, and they would have a section, sort of like a watchtower. You can see over there in the distance, there's two of them. About every 82 feet or so, there would be another watchtower where a warrior would be positioned to protect the front wall. So it did serve a defensive purpose, but I believe that the wall may have also held a symbolic purpose, essentially serving to demarcate a boundary between the mundane outside world, everything that is external, and that which is within, everything that is sacred, within the sacred space. So this wall would have wrapped around the Cahokia, the expansive Cahokia area here, and everything within. And this lines up with what the archaeologists have found in terms of evidence, but this is where the elite would have been, this is where the ruler would have been, and everyone else would have lived along the wall or on the outskirts of the wall in thatch roof homes, very similar to what we see in the Yucatan with the Maya, or in Mexico with Mesoamerican traditions. Keeping in mind that, back in the day, there was no Mexico in America. There was no border. This was all one giant landmass. Turtle Island, or known by many names through many different traditions. You can see how the mound expands over here. And so, yeah, you would have these walls, if you guys can see that. This clearly used to get to that higher level. Oh, I lost that comment. Again, little difficult to read. The sun is beaming on the screen, and the super chat, one comment comes up at a time and it quickly disappears. So if I don't catch the comment now, I'll try to reply when I have more time. So now I'll take you guys to the back over here, moving north, where there would have once been a structure about 100 feet in length. It probably rose about 50 feet in height, and this would have been the dwelling for the elite, a homestead for the elite, as well as perhaps a council or lodge for what we could really call an ancient American mystery school. This was a center of well, there was politics, but there was also art, there was astronomy, there were the mysteries and, you know, ritual aspects, religious aspects. So this was certainly a center for learning about astronomy and predicting, you know, events in the sky based on the Woodhenge. And so there are a lot of parallels here to what is observed in the Western esoteric tradition. And so have some people here who just walk around and I'll show you. But we do find a lot of parallels to what we find in the Western esoteric tradition, which parallels the ontology of the ancient indigenous people. So you can see here, the structure would have went the length of about 100 feet or so, and this would have risen to maybe about 50 feet. I'll take you over here to the corner. A lot of common practices. If you guys have watched my presentation, the esoteric science, esoteric wisdom and sacred science of the ancient Maya mystery schools, I draw parallels between the Western esoteric tradition and what we could refer to as the mystery schools of the Maya. Really no different here in ancient America. I'm finding all the evidence to essentially see the same thing. So look, here's a wooden, here is a wooden beam here where they're trying to show you where the structure would have been. You can see from the grass, the level of the mound, it actually expands out a little bit. You can see that there. And again, here's the walls. There's the interpretive center. All throughout this would have been more mounds. There's, I think, about 80 mounds that are left, 80 mounds that are remaining here, but there were many more, hundreds. Many of them destroyed at the hands of farmers, at the fate of the plow, destroyed for industrial farming, and those who terraformed the landscape. We lost that piece of history. And so essentially we lost a lot of information about this, what I would call civilization. Again, scholars would probably argue with me and say this is strictly a culture based on the terminology in academia. I would argue that this was a civilization, that there was a language, that there was monumental architecture in the sense that they're building these massive monumental mounds. This has to be one of America's greatest monuments. You know, we look to the Statue of Liberty or some of these modern things that we've put up, all of which required the wheel. This did not require the wheel. This is 100% man-made by the hands of man who were moving baskets and baskets that they created. They would first have to weave together and make the basketry, and then they would use those baskets to take 35 to 40 pounds of soil to put this together. And this would have been built in construction phases over several hundred years. So this was all happening at the time of the Dark Ages, when Europe was still struggling in the Dark Ages, and also at the decline of, around the time of the beginning of the decline of the Maya civilization in Mexico. Right here, it seems that the current picked up and the ancient Americans were thriving. Something was flowing through, something was permeating that motivated it's time to build monumental architecture complete with astronomical alignments. It's definitely, JLT says it's definitely a civilization. I have no doubt. Didn't quite catch all that comment, but I would say so. I think the argument is there, and I would be willing to argue on behalf of the idea that this was a lost civilization, in the sense that not entirely lost. We can go to the interpretive center today and learn quite a bit about the Mississippian culture, the Adena, Hopewell, the mound builders here at Cahokia, but there are many pieces that are missing, as many of the plows and artifacts have been damaged. I actually met some local farmers yesterday at Serpent Mound, And they were telling me how they find artifacts on their land all the time, arrowheads and various unusual artifacts, and they just get tossed in a bucket, and that's it. You know, there's not always this reverence for a lot of these artifacts. So this has been going on for hundreds of years. We can only imagine what has been lost to the archaeological record over time. So this is it. Here we are, Cahokia. I am going to be doing a more complete, comprehensive vlog series and documentary on Cahokia. I'm also going to be meeting up with Christopher Dunn here for a very exciting episode that will be here on this YouTube channel. Please consider subscribing, hit the like button. Be sure to check out my other videos on ancient America, as well as everything else that I have here on this channel for you. And please consider sharing these videos to help spread the word. I'm going to give you one last final view here. Robert Lee says lost empires. I hesitate to call it an empire, but these were certainly, you know, groups of, there was order and hierarchy here. There's no doubt about that. Wherever you have pyramids and mounds, you have hierarchy, which is essentially a sense of order. You know, people will look at that as the ruling class and the elite trying to oppress everyone else. That's not the only way of looking at it. That's certainly one way of looking at it, but we can also see it from the perspective of cosmology, as everything starts with one. That is the undifferentiated consciousness, the absolute. Everything starts from the one, and then it becomes aware of itself, and then we have duality and multiplicity, and everything comes from that. Then comes form and foundation, you know. So when you have this one at the top of the mound, it is very symbolic of cosmology and life itself. And here we have a butterfly. All right, that's it for now, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video from the top of Monk's Mound at Cahokia. I flew the drone up overhead earlier, and we have some amazing drone footage I'll be including in the proper documentary and series. Tony G says thank you. You're welcome, Tony. Looking forward to seeing you on the Egypt trip. If anyone else is interested in joining us for the Egypt trip, we still have 2 spaces left to join me and Christopher Dunn this September in Egypt. You can visit adeptexpeditions.com. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed this. Leave a message in the comments below. Leave all your questions in the comments below, and I'll get to them as soon as possible. This is Anyextee, Adept Expeditions, from the top of Monk's Mound at Cahokia, ancient America. Peace out, everybody.